In the first of two debates last night, New Jersey incumbent Governor Phil Murphy went head-to-head with former Republican Assemblyman Jack Ciattarelli. They clashed over issues from abortion rights to Governor Murphy's pandemic response and what the path forward should look like when it comes to public health mandates.
My position is consistent with the CDC with regard to the virus last year. Children are not as susceptible to serious illness and death as adults are.
I would just say that you are also saying on many occasions, it's up to you if you want to get vaccinated. It's your choice. You wouldn't have masking in school. We know those are the number one and two things, the weapons that we have that will keep people healthy and alive.
Vaccinations do keep people alive. I'm vaccinated.
As am I.
I'm vaccinated. I promoted my vaccination. I encourage people to get vaccinated. Do I believe that government has a right to tell people they have to take a medicine? No, I don't. My job is to provide information.
For more, let's bring in Daniel Cassino. He's a professor of government and politics at Fairleigh Dickinson University. Dan, welcome. Thanks very much for being with us. COVID politics were prominent in last night's debate. New Jersey voters say that the pandemic is a top issue in their minds. Where do the candidates stand on public health mandates?
We have to remember that New Jersey was hit harder than almost any other state by the initial wave of the COVID virus. Except now, of course, New Jersey is one of the most vaccinated states. And so what we're seeing is that New Jersey voters, by and large, are vaccinated, they are masked, and they seem to be very impatient with people who are not vaccinated and masked. And as a result, we see high levels of support for things like mask mandates. It's not until we get to things like masking 2-year-olds, which is actually part of the mandate for daycare centers in New Jersey now, that there's really any controversy at all among New Jersey voters. New Jersey voters, by and large, I think we're at about 70 to 30, say, yeah, people should be vaccinated and masked, and there's okay with restrictions on people who aren't.
So, given the contrast with these two candidates, did it appear that there was a quote-unquote winner? I always hate asking that question when it comes to debates, but did it appear as though, perhaps one candidate maybe edged out the other one during the debate?
In this case, it looked like Phil Murphy probably had the advantage. He was trying to do two things. Number one, he was trying to avoid a knockout blow, just not stumble badly. And he was trying to paint Ciattarelli as being close to Trump. And the most memorable lines from the debate did just that. Jack Ciattarelli's had a hard time explaining why he was at a Stop the Steal event. And, basically a protest of the results of the 2020 election. And he claimed rather lamely that he didn't know it was the event. He didn't see the Confederate flags and the Stop the Steal signs. He thought it was an event for something else completely. And that's really a hard line to maintain. Now, on the other hand, Murphy did take some hits about his COVID response, especially in nursing homes. But Ciattarelli is way down the polls. He needed to make a knockout here, and he just didn't get there.
Yeah, the last poll taken before Tuesday's debate showed Governor Murphy leading Ciattarelli by 9 percentage points. Now, it's the first poll to show him with only a single-digit lead. How has public opinion of Governor Murphy shifted?
Well, during the height of the pandemic, Governor Murphy saw his approval ratings go well into the 60s. He was enormously popular, and this is actually one of the reasons why Jack Ciattarelli is the nominee. There were plenty of people, Republican bigwigs, who thought maybe would have had a better chance of winning this election, who decided, boy, the Governor Murphy is just too popular. I'm going to sit this one out and wait for 4 years from now. So Jack Ciattarelli is kind of the B team of the Republican Party in New Jersey, but he's putting up a reasonable fight. The problem he has is that he has to get the support of the Republican base, which means being close to President Trump, who's still very popular among Republicans in New Jersey, while convincing the rest of the state, the moderates and independents, that he is an acceptable candidate, when Donald Trump is not popular among them. And so far, he hasn't been able to do it. We have seen that Ciattarelli's numbers have gone up over the last couple months. That's partially because he is now better known than he was, but even still being better known, we're looking at less than 60% of people in New Jersey say that they have any opinion about him or know who he is. So he still has a lot of ground to make up. The other problem he has is that you can't get there by television advertising in New Jersey. New Jersey is the single most expensive state in the country to buy TV ads, because you're either going to buy ads in New York or in Philadelphia. And Jack Ciattarelli has been really lagged behind in fundraising. So it's not clear he'll have the money, the resources to get his name out there in the way he needs to if he wants to make this more competitive.
Well, New Jersey has 9 days of early voting plus Election Day. Why is the state facing potential challenges related to staffing and new voting rules?
Well, we have to remember that most of the people who volunteer to work in the polls are elderly people who don't have other jobs, perhaps, who like getting out, who see it as a civic duty. And they're the ones who have been most frightened to go out and interact with lots of strangers. Most of them are masked, but that's still really frightening for a lot of people. So that's been the staffing issues. They've been trying to get younger people to do it, raising the amount of money in some cases that they're giving people to do it, reducing the amount of training, but we still are just not getting enough people who are willing to do it. And again, that's partially demographic and partially just fears of COVID-19. That said, it's not clear how much of an issue this is going to be. There aren't enough people working at the polls, but we have an enormous number of people in New Jersey who switched over to mail-in voting. And those people, many of whom have already voted, the problem is at this point, we don't know who's going to vote in person, who's going to vote by mail. This is going to be the first really normal election we've had. 2020 was very high turnout. 2017 and 2018 were high turnout. Does this go back to being a low turnout election? Well, we're going to have to wait and see.
All right, Dan Cassino. Dan, great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.